Good evening all and welcome. We're starting 2026 strong with Nature Week, one of my favourites. All new nature themed stories throughout the week, Monday to Friday. Tonight we're going to be heading into the haunted woods and find out later where we're going tomorrow. But for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Everything happened this past summer while I was working and temporarily living in the Midwest. I don't know much about spirits, folklore, or paranormal rules, so I'm just going to lay out exactly what happened and let you draw your own conclusion. During my first few weeks at a new job, I met this really great guy called Paul. We clicked almost instantly. One afternoon he suggested we go hiking in a nearby forest preserve. I'm originally from Russia, and I spent a huge part of my childhood in the woods, so I was genuinely excited. Forests usually feel like home to me, not something to be afraid of. That day the weather turned fast. What started as light rain became absolute sheets of water falling, and I mean pouring from the sky. Still we kept going, laughing it off, drifting further and further, until the trails disappeared completely. At some point, we were just pushing through the brush, an ankle-deep swamp water, soaked and muddy, too distracted by conversation to really notice how isolated we'd become. There was no one else around, no voices or footsteps. All that could be heard was the sound of the rain. Eventually we came across what looked like the skeletal frame of an old teepee, just the bare wooden poles still lashed together. It was strange but interesting, and without thinking too much about it, we kept moving in that very direction, and that's when we heard what sounded like a baby crying. At first it was distant, muted by the rain and trees. We stopped and listened. I remember saying something like, probably an animal. Forests are full of those things. So we kept walking, and within seconds, the crying was now next to us. Not closer, but there. As if something had moved from far away just a few feet in front of us in an instant. We froze, scanning the trees, the ground, even looking up into the branches. There was nothing. No baby, no animal, no movement of any kind. And that's when the fear really hit. We turned around and started speed walking back the way we came. As soon as we stopped to catch our breath, the crying started again. It was right beside us at the same volume. Whatever was there wanted us gone. So we ran, slipping, half blind from rain, checking on Google Maps between steps while trying to remember landmarks. And somehow we made it back to the forest entrance. We didn't talk much afterwards, just agreed that something about it was definitely, deeply off. Out of curiosity and maybe dread, we looked into the area's history later that night. Almost immediately, articles popped up about it being considered one of the most haunted forest preserves in the region. It had once been a native burial land, and 3 decades ago, 3 young boys had been brutally murdered there and left naked in a ditch. I tried to forget about it. A few weeks later, Paul admitted he couldn't stop thinking about the crying. He wanted to go back to figure out what it was. I personally thought it was a terrible idea, especially since it was already dark. Then his friend Ryan decided to join for fun, and because 2 guys in their early 20s are basically professional bad decision machines, I went along to make sure nothing happened. We didn't get there until around 11 p.m. The forest at night was nothing like it had been before, with just our flashlights cutting into the darkness. That already set the eerie tone, and after a while we reached a narrow wooden bridge crossing a shallow river, leading into the deeper part of the forest. The moment we crossed, something changed. I felt it immediately, this crushing unease, like we were somewhere we shouldn't be, unwelcome. It felt intrusive, almost disrespectful, like stepping into a room where someone was already watching you. Ryan, who had been confidently leading the way and cracking jokes, stopped dead. All three of us were hit with this overwhelming dread. Pure panic, sudden and intense, flooded us. I've been in the forest many times, but I've never felt anything like that. Then we heard footsteps, moving towards us from the dark. Ryan finally broke the silence and whispered that we should all go back. Of course, we didn't argue. We turned and speed walked towards the bridge. No one spoke until we were back on the road, and Ryan laughed it off and said he'd been worried it might just be a homeless person. But I don't think any of us believed that. As we drove away, that's when I saw her. A young woman, walking alone along the highway. She looked to be in her early 20s, possibly Native American. She was wearing very little clothing for the weather, and moving strangely. Not drunk or injured, just weird. She had this unnatural rhythm, like her body wasn't quite synced up with itself. There were no buildings nearby, no bus stops or houses, just forest and road. My stepdad is Malaysian, and he used to tell me stories about ghost women who appear on roads at night and bring death to drivers. That thought crossed my mind, but I couldn't leave her there. I convinced Paul to slow down and call out to her, asking if she needed help. She turned around very slowly. A wide and deliberate smile spread across her face and she nodded. The same dread from the forest hit me again. It was sharp and suffocating. Still, she got into the back seat directly behind me, next to Ryan. He started chatting her up, but the entire time she kept eye contact with me, not blinking or smiling, her body subtly shifting and undulating, almost vibrating, like a snake coiled just beneath skin. She answered questions vaguely. She said she came from around, claimed she'd been at a bar despite there being no bar for miles, and gave me an address deep in a residential area surrounded by forest. My eyes burned from staring at her, but I couldn't look away. I was convinced that if I turned forward, something terrible might happen. We dropped her off on a quiet street lined with old run-down houses. She stepped out of the car. I turned my head for just a second and she was gone. There were no footsteps and no door opening. All that we could see was the empty street. I didn't sleep that night. I kept imagining her smile emerging from the dark, her body moving wrong, creeping up the stairs towards my room. Even now, I can't shake the feeling that whatever we encountered in those woods didn't stay there, and that it followed us out. I've always been the kind of person who seeks out places most people avoid, be it abandoned buildings, forgotten roads, overgrown lots swallowed by nature, especially places people swear are haunted. I say that because, for most of my life, I've been a skeptic. I've never wanted to believe in ghosts or spirits, mostly because I never experienced anything that couldn't be explained away. Almost all my friends claim they've had some kind of paranormal encounter at one point or another, but I always assumed fear, imagination, or coincidence played a big role in that. That mindset didn't survive the night I went into the woods with my friend Trevor. We decided to check out what locals refer to as the most haunted road in western upstate New York. It's infamous, and if you grew up nearby, you've heard stories of it. It's a long, narrow road with no streetlights or houses and no signs of civilization once you're deep enough into it. Trees line both sides so thickly that even during the day, sunlight struggles to break through. At night, it feels like the forest is closing in on you, swallowing the road whole. Both of us had been there before, just not together. Trevor said the last time he drove down it, he heard knocking on his window and footsteps keeping pace with his car. I'd been down there a few times myself and never experienced anything remotely strange, just an overwhelming sense of unease I chalked up to nerves. Trevor isn't like me though. He's had strange things happen to him his entire life. Objects moving when no one touched them, shadows lingering too long, electronics malfunctioning around him. He genuinely believes something has followed him since he was a kid, something attached. I always brushed it off, joking that he was just sensitive or imaginative. Before going, I did a little digging. Most of what I found were forum posts and half-finished stories, but they all shared the same detail. People claimed to see a little girl standing just beyond the tree line, watching cars pass. Others talk about an old man carrying a lantern, slowly pacing through the woods like he's searching for something or someone. And then there's the thing everyone struggles to describe. A large animal, shaped wrong, often compared to a horse or dog that runs across the road and disappears without a sound. There's also supposedly an old church, hidden deep in the woods, burned down decades ago. Some say you can still find pieces of the foundation if you know where to look. Others say anyone who tries ends up lost, disoriented, or followed back to their car. We drove up and down that road a few times, partially to get comfortable, and partly because I was genuinely paranoid. Skeptic or not, being surrounded by pitch-black woods with no way to see what's watching you messes with your head. I joked about checking for serial killers or mountain lions, but the truth is I didn't know how isolated we were. That's when another car came towards us. As we passed each other, I saw something move. A black figure burst from behind their car, low, fast and solid, and then vanish as if it had never existed. My body reacted before my brain could catch up. I slammed on the brakes, heart in my throat, convinced I was about to hit a deer or some kind of animal, but there was nothing. Nothing in the road, nothing running off or making noise. It didn't disappear into the woods, it simply ceased to be. Trevor was already yelling, asking if I saw that. And before I could answer, the other car slammed on their brakes too. The driver rolled down their window and shouted, "What the hell was that?" And that was when the fear really set in. Whatever we saw wasn't just our imagination. I tried to rationalize it. A shadow? A trick of the headlights? But my hands were shaking and I kept driving. The woods felt different now. Eventually, Trevor suggested we park to turn everything off and try and get an EVP. And against my better judgment, I agreed. We killed the engine and headlights. Instantly, the darkness swallowed us. We grabbed flashlights and stepped out, careful not to drain the battery. The silence was unnatural. We couldn't hear the bugs or rustling leaves or anything. We walked maybe 10 feet from the car when it happened. 4 clicks. All 4 doors locked at the exact same time. The sound echoed, and we stared at each other, then ran back to the car. Every door was locked. My keys were still hanging around my neck untouched. Nothing had brushed against them. There was no explanation. We jumped back, sped off, adrenaline flooding my system. A little further down the road I had to pull over because my chest felt tight and my vision was tunneling. We sat there in silence. I stared straight ahead while Trevor scanned the woods beside us with his flashlight. He said his flashlight kept flickering, but we brushed it off as old batteries, though it didn't help my nerves. That's when I noticed a faint glow deep between the trees. At first I thought it was someone else's flashlight, but it wasn't harsh or white. It was steady yellow and warm, like a lantern. It moved slowly, weaving between the trunks, never getting closer or getting further. As it disappeared deeper into the woods, I turned to Trevor to ask if he saw it too. Before he could answer, we heard footsteps crunching through the leaves just a few feet from the car. I didn't wait to see anything else. I turned the engine on and floored it, not stopping until we were far away from that road and those woods. I still don't know what I encountered that night. I don't know if it was something tied to the land or something drawn to Trevor. Maybe one day when I grow more courage I'll go back with more people. Hell, maybe we'll even try and find those trails leading to the burned church. But honestly, I'm scared that next time, whatever it was, might not leave us alone. About 2 or 3 years ago, I was sitting with some friends in my car outside one of my friends' houses. It was around 9 p.m. in the wintertime, so it was dark out, but the weather was clear. There were 5 of us in the car, myself and one friend in the passenger seat, and 3 friends sitting in the middle row. We were talking about some random topic, when all of a sudden I felt an intense chill run straight down my spine, like we were being watched. I turned to my friend in the passenger seat, and he looked up at me at the exact same time, like he'd just seen a ghost. I asked him if he'd felt it too. He said he had. None of the other friends in the back felt anything. We both felt really strange, but we ignored it and kept talking. A few minutes later, the feeling came back even stronger. Once again, my friend and I looked at each other at the same time. He looked past me out the driver's side window, which my back was to, and told me not to turn around. None of my other friends saw anything, but he said there was something out there, and I could feel a presence behind me. We took turns describing what we sensed, and were absolutely sure that we were seeing the same thing. It was pure white and humanoid, though the details are fuzzy now. Clearer descriptions come later. After a minute or so it vanished, and we were completely shaken. Then it got even stronger. My friend and I both felt the presence moving in circles around the car, and we started seeing green, glowing circles moving quickly around us. It's hard to explain. We didn't really see them as much as know they were there. They started moving faster and faster, and we were completely losing it. Then suddenly they disappeared. Again, only the 2 of us saw and felt this. Then it happened. My friend and I were leaned back, talking in the middle row, when all of a sudden, on the sidewalk behind the car, there was a flash of white light, and a creature sprinting towards us. It was pure white, bipedal, humanoid in shape, and extremely tall and lanky. I'd guess around 7 feet tall. It had a horse-shaped head, long, thin black hair, black eyes, and claws. We screamed at the same time, started the car, and got the hell out of there. Once we were far away, we took turns describing what we saw, and our descriptions matched perfectly. I dropped everyone off as I drove home. I still felt the presence behind me. I couldn't tell if it was inside the car or following it, but every time I stopped at the light or sign, I felt it catch up, so I sped the rest of the way home. When I arrived, it was gone. Both my friend and I sensed what happened, and it wasn't trying to hurt us, but just make itself known. Nothing like it has happened before or since. The only connection between my passenger seat friend and me, that the others didn't share, is that we were both Christian at the time. Does anyone have any idea what we experienced? This is a story, really a series of encounters and experiences that has been passed down from generation to generation in the rural mountain community where I grew up. Everyone knows about it. Almost everyone has experienced it at some point, even if some people refuse to speak of it. In my part of the world, where my father and his family were raised, there are countless ghost stories and reports of unexplained creatures roaming the deep hollows and thick woods. But one legend has always fascinated me more than any other. I first came across it on a local ghost sighting website that was created in the early 2000s. Many regional legends and paranormal encounters were submitted there for anyone to read. But one story always stayed with me, and it went like this. Whenever you're walking anywhere along the rural roads in the area, you will always hear someone or something walking directly beside you deep in the woods on the opposite side of the road. If you stop, it stops. If you keep walking, it walks at the exact same pace as you, and will even mimic your footsteps. Many locals have experienced this, and it is incredibly eerie. From the first moment I read that report, I was completely hooked. Growing up, I would always ask around and tell family members and other people who lived in the area about the story, and every single one of them would say the same thing. They believed it was the devil, or some kind of demonic entity. Some of them even had their own encounters. My uncle, who used to go out late at night hunting raccoons and other small game, had a terrifying experience one night while hunting deep in the woods. The moon barely lit the trees around him, and he had his pack of hunting dogs with him, each one loyal regardless of the danger. But on that particular night, something had them spooked. They heard or saw something in the darkness and refused to go any further into the forest where they had been tracking. My uncle tried everything to make them move forward, but they stood frozen in place. Rifle in hand, my uncle scanned the area, unable to see or hear anything unusual. But the dogs definitely sensed something. They began to cower, and as soon as they did, my uncle heard something move quickly through the brush around him, almost like it was circling him. He knew whatever it was wasn't something to mess with, especially being an older man alone in the woods, so he immediately started heading back towards the house. The dogs followed close behind, but whatever it was began following him too. Staying hidden in the blackness of the trees, he picked up the pace, and so did it. Finally, terrified, he broke into a run towards home. The thing chased him and his dogs all the way to the clearing of his property, before finally ceasing its pursuit. My uncle ran inside, locked every door and window, and didn't step back outside until morning. I've asked many people about that night, and they all confirmed the same story. Even my grandmother, his sister, remember him telling the family the next day while he was still shaken from the experience. Another story I heard came from my mother about a family friend who once lived in an old house deep in the woods. She told me that she loved the peace, quiet, and isolation the place offered, but things were not what they seemed. She remembered as a child seeing him come to my grandmother's house in the mornings for coffee, looking pale and exhausted and worn down, as if he hadn't slept in days or even weeks. Whenever my grandmother asked what was wrong, he told her there was a demon living in the house. He said it rattled the windows, shook the walls, and threw plates and forks, tossed furniture, and slammed the front door open and shut late at night. He said it always happened after dark, and that it never allowed him to sleep. This went on for months, perhaps longer, until one night when the activity became violent. The entity began throwing plates and glasses at his head, trying to injure or end his life. With nowhere to go and surrounded by deep woods, the man relied on his Christian faith. He dropped to his knees and began praying, denouncing the presence in the name of Jesus Christ, and commanding it to leave his home. The entity only became more enraged, throwing more objects and destroying more of the house. Terrified, the man fled into the forest, hoping to find a road. After running for hours, he finally reached one and followed it all the way to my grandmother's house before dawn. He never told her as he ran through the woods that he could hear the demon chasing him through the night, never stopping its pursuit until he reached the road. Even then, he said he could still hear it keeping pace with him, just inside the tree line. Those of us in Alaska are far too familiar with the summer's sunshine. The days have little to no light, but once you reach the Arctic Circle, it's a whole other pot of chili entirely. When the sun refuses to go down beyond the horizon, that's when you start to fear the dark. Old Inuit tales tell of the Tornit, which is as follows. Long before the world became the way it is now, back when the first humans crossed the Bering Land Bridge and spread into the far northern lands, the Inuit were not alone in the Arctic. In those early days, another people lived beside them in the frozen country around Cumberland South and beyond. These people were known as the Tornit. The Tornit were not like the Inuits, They were much taller, with longer arms and longer legs, and possessed a strength far beyond that of ordinary men. Their Tornit could lift and throw boulders that not even the strongest Inuit could move, and some of those stones are said to still lie scattered across the land, untouched to this day. They could hold a harpooned walrus as easily as an Inuit might hold a seal, but for all their power, their eyesight was poor, and they were often clumsy in ways that made them dangerous without meaning to be. The Tornit lived in villages of their own, separate from the Inuit, though they shared the same hunting grounds. Their houses were built of stone, and unlike Inuit snow houses, they did not bother to cover them with snow for warmth during the winter. They wore long, wide coats made of deer skin that reached down to their knees and were trimmed with leather straps. When they went sealing on ice, they fastened the lower edges of their coats into the snow with wooden pegs, so the wind could not blow underneath. Beneath their coats, they carried small lamps to melt snow for drinking water, and to roast pieces of seal meat while they waited beside breathing holes in the ice. Despite their differences, the Inuit and the Tornit lived peacefully together for many years. They hunted side by side, and sometimes even played games together. But the Inuit soon learned not to play ball with the Tornit, for the Tornit didn't realize how strong they were, and often injured their playfellows badly. The Inuit tried to make this in good humor, knowing they meant no harm. There was, however, one problem that slowly poisoned their friendship. The Inuit were skilled builders of kayaks, which they used to hunt once the ice broke up in the spring. The Tornit saw how useful these boats were, but for some reason they could never master the craft of building themselves. Instead, from time to time, they would steal kayaks from the Inuit. The Inuit did not dare confront them directly, for the Tornit were far stronger than any man among them. Resentment grew in the Inuit camps. They spoke amongst themselves of thefts and wondered how to stop them. Anger simmered beneath the surface, just waiting for a spark. And that spark came when a young Tornit took the kayak of a young Inuit without permission. While sealing, he ran into it, floating in ice, and the owner of the kayak said nothing at first, but his anger burned hot, and that night while the Tornit slept, the Inuit slipped into his tent and drove a knife into his nape, ending his life. The Tornit had already sensed growing hostility. When the word spread of the murder, fear swept through their villages. They believed the Inuit would now kill them one by one in secret, just as their young hunter had been killed. Rather than risk destruction, the Tornit chose to flee the country. To confuse their neighbors, they cut the tails from their long coats and tied their hair into strange bunches that stuck out behind them, so that anyone who would glimpse them would think they were an unfamiliar people. Then, under the cover of darkness, the Tornit abandoned their stone houses and vanished into the wilderness. The Inuit were relieved to see them gone, and made no attempt to follow. Since that time, the Tornit is said to wander only in the deep brush and lonely tundra. Hunters speak of strange towering figures glimpsed at a distance, of massive footprints in the snow, of boulders that seem to have been moved by impossible strength. Some tell of hunters who vanished and were later found dead and mangled, or never at all. That's the story of the Tornit, and if you want more, go ask an Inuit elder. They know them best. But I can now share with you my own experience with the Tornit, or as we local non-natives call them, the Alaskan Bushmen. It was midsummer on the longest day of the year. I was out camping, well, more like hunting out in the Arctic. In a nearby village, I was asked to hunt down a bear that had raided a storage shed and got away with quite a bit of food. Anyway, I was mushing through the tundra, following the tracks of the bear. At first, I thought it was a tree due to how tall it was. It seemed to keep pace with me, but always at a distance like an uncanny silhouette. I needed to keep a sturdy pace so as to not tire out the team, so I tried to keep an eye on it. But when I blinked, it was gone again, as fast as it appeared. The wind then began to pick up, not a warm wind from the south, but a Chinook wind that puts ice in your veins. That's when I saw them again. Tall shadows far out in front of me. Bring the dogs in. I stare at them. Though I couldn't see their features, I knew they were watching me. No, that's not quite right. They were studying me, like if I was worth anything. The feeling made goosebumps rise all over my body, like my instincts were telling me to run. So I did. Turning the team around, I ran. The dogs didn't need me to say anything, they just booked it. I grabbed onto the sled for dear life as they dashed. There were more of them now, shadows, silhouettes all around us. Then in a blink, all that's left was a laughing wind. 13 years ago, I camped on what were known as headhunter grounds deep in the jungle of Borneo. Before we even set up, our guides warned us that the area was considered haunted and that we needed to be extremely respectful while staying there. That night, something strange happened. At one point I woke up and noticed that everyone, about 12 of us, had gotten out of their hammocks and were walking towards the fire pit. I checked my digital watch, but it had reset and was flashing 12:00. I figured it must be late and decided to get a bit more sleep. Normally, if someone overslept, someone else would wake them. When I woke up again, it was daylight. Everyone was back in their hammocks and my watch was still flashing 12:00. At breakfast, I brought it up, and everyone immediately insisted I must have been dreaming, until one guy spoke up. He said he saw it too. According to him, everyone at 1 a.m. got up out of their hammocks and walked towards the fire pit. What really unsettled me was that I've never had another issue with my watch resetting after we left that camp. The idea of some kind of mass possession or shared experience seriously freaked me out. Of course, there are possible explanations. I could have been dreaming and he could have decided to lie, but that would have been completely out of character for him, as he hated drawing attention to himself. One of the guides also told me a story that stuck with me. He said he had once been lying in his hammock and flicked his cigarette onto the ground, which is considered very disrespectful in their culture. A few moments later, he felt something burning his back. When he checked, he had a small burn mark just like a cigarette burn. The spirits at the site were said to be headhunters. According to legend, they had to present a certain number of enemy heads to their father in order to be allowed to marry his daughter. There were a lot of deaths in that jungle. I'm not entirely sure what the spirits are believed to do, but protecting the jungle is supposed to be part of it. I'm very open to any explanations and theories, and if anyone has had any similar experiences in the jungle of Malaysia, I'd love to hear them. My husband is from Mississippi, and I'm from California. We met in LA, and when things started getting serious about 8 years ago, he decided it was time to take me home to meet his family. I've always been a history nerd, so I asked if we could visit a Civil War battlefield while we were there. California doesn't really have anything like that, at least nothing preserved the same way. He suggested one near an old river town in Mississippi, so we took a short road trip, just the two of us. The battlefield was huge, quiet, and mostly reclaimed by forest. There's a narrow road that winds through the trees, so you can stop at different points of interest. It was the middle of a weekday, bright sun overhead, and we didn't see a single other person the entire time. No bus tours, no park rangers. It was just us in the woods. As we drove deeper in, we took a slow turn, and that was when everything changed. I noticed it before I could really process it. The forest went completely silent. It was as if someone had hit the mute button, with not the stirring of a bird, leaves, or insect to be heard. I didn't say anything. We were still a pretty new couple, and I didn't want to sound unhinged by bringing up something paranormal. I just kept staring out the window, trying to convince myself I was overthinking it. Then my husband slowed the car and stopped. He didn't say a word. He didn't look at me. The engine idled softly, the only sound left. That's when I started hearing voices. At first I thought it was the radio, low, overlapping male voices like a conversation bleeding through static. But it didn't sound modern. It sounded close, too close, like it was happening inside my head. I froze, staring straight ahead, afraid that if I moved or looked at him, whatever this was would notice me. Slowly and carefully, my husband reached out and turned the radio down, then off. But the voices didn't stop. They got louder. He shut off the engine, and suddenly it felt like we were standing in the middle of a crowd, men all around us talking one over another. I couldn't make out exact words, but the tone was unmistakable. Confusion, urgency, and disbelief. Both of us later agreed on the same terrifying detail. It felt like they were talking about us, like we weren't supposed to be there, like they could see us even though we could not see them. The air felt almost pressurized. My chest hurt. I remember thinking that if I opened the car door, I'd step into something I wouldn't be able to come back out of. I have no idea how long we sat there for. Seconds, minutes. It felt suspended, like time itself had stalled. Then just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The voices vanished mid-thought. The forest sounds slammed back in all at once. Birds chirping loudly, leaves rustling, insects buzzing. A deer walked calmly across the road in front of us, like nothing had ever happened. Like it was signaling that whatever had been there was gone. Almost immediately another car appeared behind us. My husband started the engine so fast it startled me, and we drove on without saying another word. We didn't talk until we were well away from the area. When we finally did, we both realized we'd experienced the same thing, and every detail lined up. What still messes with me is this. Earlier in our lives, we'd both been deeply interested in the paranormal, but from opposite sides. He had leaned heavily into religious explanations and belief, while I'd been more spiritual. At the time this happened, he had walked away from religion entirely and believed nothing beyond the physical world. I, on the other hand, had become a hardcore skeptic and was quite mourning the idea that there was anything more out there. Neither of us knew the other felt that way. That experience shattered both of us. So what do you think? Did we stumble into some kind of time slip and interrupt a moment that never fully faded? A residual echo of something replaying itself, unaware that we were ever there until we were? I can't wrap my head around it. Perhaps you can, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. I've gone back and forth for years about whether this was just strange coincidence, an animal encounter gone wrong, or something I genuinely can't understand. Recently, a friend and I started talking about it again, and the more we compared memories, the more unsettled I became. I live in Illinois, and I've posted before about other haunted locations I've visited, including Bachelor's Grove Cemetery. I'm no stranger to creepy places, and I don't jump straight into paranormal conclusions without trying to rule things out first. But this experience in a stretch of local wood has never sat right with me no matter how much time passes. The first incident happened in late August of 2016. At the time, my friend and I were both long-distance runners. We ran cross-country and track in high school, and continued training afterwards. Running late at night wasn't unusual for us. My friend worked a job that often didn't let him out until 10 or 11 p.m, so most of our runs happened when the world had already quieted down. By then, we had been running this route for years. We knew every crack in the pavement, every bend in the trail, and every spot where the ground dipped or roots could stick out. We could practically run it with our eyes closed. The route itself started at a local running path. It goes on for about 2.5 blocks, then cuts into a wooded area that follows a large creek. Part of the trail runs close enough to houses and a park that you can sometimes see lights through the trees or hear distant traffic. But other sections feel noticeably cut off, especially at night. The tree cover thickens and the sound dampens. This isn't deep wilderness, but it's secluded enough that once you're in the woods after dark, it feels like a different place entirely. There's no wildlife around, it's mostly just raccoons and skunks, which gave us more than a few heart attacks over the years. Occasionally we'd see deer, and once in a while a beaver near the creek. Coyotes had been appearing more frequently in nearby neighborhoods, but we had never once seen or heard them in these woods. And this is important. There are no bears or wolves in the area. None. None historically, and not currently. So we met up to run one night at around 11:15. The air felt thick and charged. Thunderstorms were forecast with lightning expected. Because of the storm, and because we were stupidly confident from years of uneventful night runs, we made a decision we regret to this day. We left our phones in the car so that they wouldn't get wet. The one and only time we ever did that. The plan was to run fast, turn around and be back before the storm rolled in. Once inside the woods, the trail is covered in wood chip until about 200 meters before the turnaround point, where it transitions into asphalt. The turnaround itself is a water pumping station that was installed after the town had serious flooding problems. It's surrounded by a chain-link fencing and always felt unsettling at night. Industrial, isolated, humming faintly when everything else was quiet. We ran to the pumping station, slowed briefly, turned around and started heading back. From the asphalt section to the turnaround and back usually took no more than 2 to 3 minutes total. That timing is crucial. On the way back, just before the asphalt turned back into wood chips, we saw something standing directly in the middle of the path. At first, my brain refused to process it as anything meaningful. The closest shape I could compare it to was an upside-down trash can, wide at the top, slightly narrower at the bottom. But that description doesn't fully capture how wrong it looked. Its outline was fuzzy and blurred, like the darkness around it didn't quite settle. It didn't reflect light the way an object should. It looked less like something placed there, and more like something that had condensed into existence. I'd estimate it to be around 3 to 4 feet tall. What made my stomach drop was the realization that we had passed the exact spot only minutes earlier. There had been nothing there, no obstruction or figure. Whatever this was had appeared in the span of 2 to 3 minutes. We slowed to a stop, confused but not immediately panicked. Our first thought was that it had to be a person. Maybe someone trying to mess with runners. Teenagers sometimes hung out in the woods late at night to drink or smoke. But that explanation started falling apart almost immediately. Teenagers allowed, you hear laughter, talking, footsteps, branches snapping. Sound carries in those woods at night. This thing was completely silent. We cautiously started walking closer, and the closer we got, the more wrong it felt. There was no detail to it, no clear limbs, no clothing, no features, Just that shape standing perfectly still in the center of the trail. When we were about 50 feet away, it moved. Not by stepping forwards or by turning normally. Its upper portion swayed unnaturally far to the left, then far to the right, like it was pivoting on something that didn't follow human or animal anatomy. As it did, we saw faint red glares appear on either side of it. The closest comparison I can make is the glow at the end of a cigarette when someone inhales, dim, dull, but unmistakably there in the total darkness. Those red points didn't cast light, they didn't blink. They just appeared when it turned, then vanished. That's when the unease became full-blown fear. Neither of us spoke at first. The woods felt unnaturally quiet, as if even the insects had gone still. It made no sound at all. It was just the path, us and that thing, swaying back and forth like it was testing how we would react. We agreed that whatever it was, we didn't want to find out what happened if we got any closer, and started backing away slowly, never taking our eyes off it. It didn't follow. It just stayed there, swaying left and right, those red glares appearing and disappearing as if it were tracking us without moving. Then we turned and ran. We sprinted the entire way back to my car, adrenaline wiping out any sense of exhaustion. Once there, we decided to drive back towards the spot to see if we could make sense of it. By the time we returned about half an hour later, lightning was flashing across the sky. Still no rain, but jagged bolts lighting up the woods in harsh bursts. And there was nothing. No figure, or disturbed wood chip, or footprints, or broken branches. There was nothing that suggested anything large had ever stood there. Eventually, unable to explain it, we tried to forget it. Then December happened. Near the end of that year, during one of our first nighttime runs since the incident, we returned to the pumping station. That's when we found something that made my blood run cold. Lodged in the chain-link fence was a deer leg. It wasn't scattered or torn apart the way predators usually leave remains. It was almost completely stripped clean, down to the bone, except for patches of skin, clumps of hair, and the hoof at the bottom. The entire leg from thigh to hoof was intact, as if it had been deliberately separated and placed there. Not long after, I brought another friend to the woods. He claims he can see spirits. I didn't tell him what we'd seen, only that something strange had happened. As we approached the spot where the figure had been, he suddenly stopped and stared into the trees, looking genuinely shaken. And when I asked what was wrong, he described a cloaked figure about the same height as we'd seen, with small, beady red eyes, watching us from the woods. He said that when it realized he could see it, it took off deeper into the woods at an unnatural speed. In the weeks that followed, my original running friend kept finding more remains. First, a spinal column with rib fragment lying in the grass near the trail. He moved it next to the leg to keep track of everything. 3 days later, in the exact same spot, he found a neck vertebrae. A few days after that, in the same place, another unidentified bone appeared. At that point, the idea of a normal animal encounter stopped making sense. The placement felt intentional, the timing felt deliberate, and the memory of those red glares in the darkness still hadn't faded. I don't know what we encountered in those woods. I don't know if it's still there. But whatever it was, I felt like it noticed us. If anyone has folklore theories or similar explanations, I'm desperate for answers. A lot of weird and unexplainable things have happened to me over the course of my life. But there's one event I still think about years later, and no matter how much time passes, I can't seem to rationalize it. This happened in Ontario, Canada, when I was about 13. I grew up in a suburban area with a large city park nearby. The park wrapped around a lake and was surrounded by thick woods, dense, tangled trees that swallowed light. There was a narrow dirt trail that cut through the woods along the lake. During the day, families used to jog or walk dogs. At night it became a shortcut only locals knew about. I took it occasionally when I wanted to shave time off my walk home. There were very few light posts along the trail, and most of them barely worked. Once you were a few minutes in, the darkness became absolute, like the woods were closing in around you. On this particular night I was alone. The air was still and unnaturally quiet. No wind or insects, and I remember feeling uneasy, but trying to brush it off. I was young and didn't scare easy, and told myself it was just the trees. About halfway down the trail, something caught my attention in my peripheral vision. To my left, roughly 8 feet off the path, deep in the bushes, was a low-hanging branch. It was a bright white shape, not a reflection or a light source. It didn't shine or cast beams. It was solid and glowing from within, like it existed separately from the darkness around it. It wasn't an orb or a floating light, it had mass. As I kept walking, the shape moved. It stayed parallel to me, gliding through the undergrowth at that same pace I was walking. The branches and leaves partially obscured it, but that made it worse. The foliage seemed to outline it in place, briefly revealing proportions that suggested a humanoid form, upright, tall, with a vague head and shoulders shape. Not detailed, but just enough to tell me it wasn't random. What unsettled me immediately wasn't just what I was seeing, but what I wasn't hearing. There were no snapping branches or leaves rustling or footsteps. Anything. I knew the trail well. Even small animals made sound, but whatever this was moved effortlessly through dense brush in absolute silence. And that's when curiosity turned into fear. I slowed down, my heart starting to pound, and convinced myself it was nothing, some kind of trick of the light, maybe moonlight reflecting off something white. But the glow didn't flicker or fade. It stayed consistent and intentional. When I finally processed what I was seeing, real panic hit. I remember letting out an involuntary shriek and stumbling backwards, my shoes sliding in dirt as I pulled away from the trees. The moment I turned my head and looked directly where it had been, it was gone. Not retreating, but gone, like it had never been there at all. The woods went completely silent again, and I felt terrified. I thought I was being watched, even though I couldn't see anything. I didn't wait around to find out. I bolted down the trail, adrenaline drowning out every other thought. And I didn't stop running until I was back under a streetlight. To this day, I don't know what I saw. I've been replaying it over and over, trying to explain it away. I wasn't on drugs and I wasn't sleep deprived. Aside from the occasional sleep paralysis years later, I've never experienced hallucinations or anything resembling them while fully awake. I didn't have mental health issues then and don't now. Could it have been a person wearing a glowing white cloth? Maybe. But that doesn't explain the silence or the speed or how it vanished instantly without a sound. Anyone moving through there would have made a lot of noise. Could it have been a visual distortion, a trick of the eyes in low light? Possibly. But it moved with intent towards me. Or perhaps something else entirely. An entity, a ghost? Something tied to the woods themselves? I don't know. All I know is that ever since that night I avoid wooded trails after dark. I work at a wildlife rehabilitation center tucked deep in the forest, perched on top of a long, sloping hill and surrounded by miles of trees in every direction. The nearest streetlight is about a 20-minute drive away, and once the sun goes down, the darkness feels absolute. On nights when the moon isn't high enough to break through the canopy, you genuinely can't see your own hand in front of your face. For privacy's sake, I won't be sharing the name or exact location of the facility. I started working here last year and was almost immediately placed on the closing shift, 11 AM to 9 PM, though that was more of a suggestion than a rule. Between emergency intakes and the sheer number of animals in our care, we were often still on the property well past midnight, moving silently through buildings lit by buzzing fluorescents and headlamps. I realized the place had something wrong with it a few weeks into the job. The land itself has a dark history. One of the routes used during a forced removal in the 1800s cut directly through what is now the property. You can still feel it when you stand still long enough, especially in the dark. Like the woods are holding onto something they don't want to let go of. These are some of the things I witnessed or have been told by co-workers since working here. One night as we were wrapping up downstairs and preparing to shut everything down, the doorbell rang. It had to be around 10 p.m. by then. We stop admissions at 5 and all intakes are appointment only, though we do occasionally get desperate walk-ins. With an exhausted sigh, my co-worker volunteered to go upstairs and see who it was. She came back down a few minutes later empty-handed, pale and visibly shaken. "There's no one at the door," she said, "and there's no other car in the lot." We checked the cameras. Nothing. No headlights or movement. All that we saw was an empty gravel lot and the trees swaying slightly in the dark. This exact scenario has happened at least 2 more times since then. I've always been a little sensitive to strange things, but I'm skeptical by nature. I prefer logic before anything else, so I initially blamed faulty wiring or an electrical glitch, but that explanation gets harder to cling to when you start noticing patterns. At night, the building changes. Rooms that feel bright and clean and welcoming during the day take on a different energy after 8:30 p.m. Sound carries in strange ways, and I avoid being alone in there whenever possible. And after 8:30 things get weird. Most of the time it's subtle, an oppressive feeling of being watched, or the sense that something just slipped out of view when you turned your head. You catch movement in your peripheral vision, but when you look directly at it, there's nothing there, just empty space. One of our interns experienced something worse. As she was leaving late one night, she froze near the parking lot and asked if someone was messing with her. She said she clearly heard a voice whisper, "Psst, hey, over here." But no one was outside. The woods were completely still. Another night, my co-worker went out to finishing caring for animals in some of the outdoor enclosures that hadn't been handled during the day. I stayed behind to prepare diets for a group of raccoon babies inside. The building was silent, except for the hum of appliances and the faint scratching of animals settling down for the night. We had a microwave mounted above the counter, and I was used to seeing my own reflection in the darkened glass. I pulled the warm bowl out, closed the door and froze. In the reflection behind my own silhouette was another shape, taller and thinner. I spun around so fast I nearly dropped the bowl. The room was empty. When I looked back at the microwave, the reflection was gone. 2 of my co-workers on completely separate occasions have mentioned seeing the same thing, a woman dressed in buckskin. One saw her walking slowly down the hallway, another saw her standing silently in the laundry room. Both times, she vanished before they could speak, turning a corner or fading from sight, as if she'd never been there at all. There are also small, separate buildings on the property that are now used for storage. Years ago, interns used to stay there overnight. I've never set foot inside, and I hope I never have to. Every time I pass it, I feel a crawling sensation between my shoulders, like someone is standing just behind me, close enough that I should be able to hear them breathe. Several months ago, we were told interns would no longer be housed there. The reason was never officially documented, but word spread quickly among staff. Late one night, a man walked into the building and stood silently in the doorway watching the interns while they slept. No one recognized him, and no one ever saw him leave. Since then, trail cams and security cameras have been installed all over the property. They've caught animals, falling branches and shadows that don't quite make sense, but nothing definitive enough to explain what so many of us feel every night. There are dozens more stories I could tell about this place, some smaller, some worse, and some that just feel undeniably wrong. If anything else happens, I'll be sure to update you. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I do hope that you have enjoyed tonight's collection of stories. If you have, please be sure to let me know. Your comments do really mean an awful lot. I'll be back again tomorrow with even more of Nature Week, as we're going to be heading into the middle of nowhere for another creepy collection of nighttime tales. I'd like to give one final big thank you to my members and patrons whose names can be seen on screen. If you would like to join their ranks and get some cool exclusive perks, feel free to follow the link in the description to Patreon to find out more. But that's it from me. Stay awesome, and I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.